following is an HCPSS TV special presentation.
Hi, I'm Brian Bassett with the Howard County Public School System. Welcome to HCPSS Insight, a live and interactive discussion about topics that matter to you and impact Howard County students. Today, 3 panels featuring a combination of students, staff, and parents will discuss ways to ensure diversity among student leadership by creating an inclusive and equitable environment in our schools. The first panel is going to help us frame the discussion by considering how to create an inclusive environment for all students. The second panel will explore ways to raise the student voice in order to impact positive change in their school community. And the third panel will look at ways that students and staff at every Howard County school can ensure that the voice of the student body is equally represented by all backgrounds and all interests. I invite students, parents, staff, and community members to be part of this conversation on Twitter. Using the hashtag HCPSS community, a number of students and staff will be leading the online conversation throughout this broadcast, and we hope that it will continue well beyond this hour. In fact, we have a number of students joining us here in studio that will be helping to lead this online discussion. So let's begin. Our first panel is going to consider how we can all work together to ensure that our schools are providing an environment where every student feels they have an opportunity to have a voice. Joining me on set is John Crownapple, the Coordinator for Cultural Proficiency for the Howard County Public School System, Lucero Espinal, a student at Oakland Mills High School, and Amna Mahmood, a Mount Hebron High School student. Welcome, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll start the conversation. John, I'll direct this your way. Just a general overview to kick this off. What does diversity in student leadership look like?
That's an interesting question just to start off with, and there's a lot to unpack within that question.
What could it look like?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me, even in the phrasing of the question, is what diversity looks like, which assumes that diversity is visual. So, this is the type of question that we think is really good for the student leadership groups themselves to engage in. And as a part of that, first of all, recognizing that diversity, it's about visible diversity and not so visible diversity. So, what does diversity look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? Because diversity is really only half of the equation. So whenever you get 2 people together in a room, you have diversity, right? So it's really diversity and inclusion. So how inclusive we are with our diversity.
Lucero, John brought up a good point. To you, what does diversity feel like?
Well, for me, diversity feels like that everyone has an equal amount of share of ideas in whatever group that they have in. They feel comfortable with everyone around them, and they feel like they can almost confide with everyone else and share their ideas, and they wouldn't be judged for anything else.
Mm-hmm. Who's everyone?
Everyone meaning students and teachers, staff, parents, everyone in the community.
And everyone and anyone, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah. And so, Amna, we'll get you here in the conversation as well. When we talk about everyone and anyone in a school community, what are some ways that you think that we may be able to better engage everyone? And we'll get more into this discussion as we go on through this hour. But talk about ways, because everyone may not everyone may feel like it's everyone, right? So what does everyone look like at your school? How do we engage everyone?
Well, to me, everyone is beyond race. Diversity, to me and in my school, it's not just about having different races. It's more about having different opinions and different perspectives, viewpoints on issues, more than just having a set of students having their own opinions. engaging students, I think, is more about communicating to each other and sharing their own thoughts and perspectives rather than just sitting down inclusively and talking to yourself. So diversity to me is communicating with other students and also sharing your perspective and ideas rather than just sitting alone with an exclusive group of students or just by yourself in general.
So, but why is that important? We have groups in our schools. We have student governments, and we have other groups. We have Alpha Achievers, we have National Honor Societies, and we have lots of different groups that students have a voice in. But when we consider the entire school community, why is it important that that diverse group of students that you just so eloquently told me about, why is it important that they all have a voice in the school community?
Well, if they don't have a voice, then you're not having a diverse group of students, because if your voice is not being spoken or told or heard, then there's no point of having a diverse group, because diversity means like your view and your opinion and your thoughts are being heard. But if you're not being heard, or if not everyone is included, then there is always someone whose thoughts or ideas are not being heard. So then that breaks the idea of having a diversity group or being diverse in general to me and my school.
Yeah, this brings actually up the other part of diversity, inclusion, and equity. And so in terms of your original question, what does diversity look like, and just my suggesting that we expand that question a little bit, one part of that expansion would be what is leadership doing? What is diversity in terms of leadership? What does it look like, and what are they doing? So I would suggest that paying attention to creating an inclusive environment, leadership has to attend to our history. And we have in our country a history that was based in exclusion. We had a very inclusive document, a beautifully inclusive document made for a very exclusive group of people, white, male, property owners. And our schools today aren't outside of our history and our tradition. So part of leadership in ensuring diverse and inclusive environments is paying attention to equity. And what that means is understanding that there are whole groups of students, whole groups of people in our country that have been historically marginalized. So part of what diversity looks like in action is making corrections for that historic marginalization, to basically do a course correction, to right the ship, so that everyone, no matter what their race, no matter what their gender, and I mentioned those two because those historically have been the most visible diversity elements, no matter what their diversity, the dimensions of their diversity in terms of their identity, no matter what it is, they see themselves as leaders, they see themselves as in the center of the school environment, and that it's home, it's a place of belonging for them.
And that's easier said than done. Right. And I listened to students at a meeting that I attended recently, and one of the students said, well, people need to take advantage of the opportunities. They're there, and if students choose not to take advantage of them, then they're going to miss out on the opportunities, which may be true to an extent. I understood his point. But at the same time, Lucero, do you feel that every student in the school, and this might be a tough question, but do you believe that there are students in your school that don't feel that environment maybe have been created in the school where they can truly have a voice and have a say on issues that impact your school community or impact something that they're very interested in at the school?
Yes, I do think that is true, because even though you say that opportunities are out there, there are resources to help you succeed or continue whatever path you want to do. It's difficult when the environment itself, even though they're offering all these advantages, if you don't feel comfortable to take those opportunities, it's going to be difficult. And even though everyone says, there's support, and it's one thing to say something, it's another thing to actually do it. And looking back at my own school, we have multiple opportunities, but kind of like Mr. Crownapple said, creating an inclusive environment is often seen, and it makes it difficult for students, especially those who are marginalized, to go into these environments and just kind of suggest an idea, because they feel that they're not going to be, the situation is going to be taken very lightly, they're not going to be taken seriously, their ideas aren't going to be shared, And if a student doesn't feel comfortable, then they're not going to put themselves out there, which makes it difficult to find leadership within those groups, to find that one person that, you know what, something's wrong here, we should try changing something. But when everyone else is like, oh, we'll support you, but then when the event actually occurs, everyone just kind of flees away, it makes it difficult to just kind of have that one person continuing on when everyone else is just kind of saying no.
And that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. John, you were working on an initiative this year, Student Voice Circles, and on the next panel we're going to dive deep into Student Voice Circles. But talk about the role when Lucero, when she brings up, all students having a voice that's not marginalized, but is also impactful, and it's not just an opinion; it's a true voice.
Right. Talk
about how Student Voice Circles plays a role there.
Right. Yeah, student voice, that's another one to unpack, because it's more, what we're trying to do in Howard County is more than just pay attention to student voice. We have to really unpack what we mean by student voice, and I heard someone say the other day that we're going to give students voice. Well, that's not the case. Voice is power. Students already have a voice. What we need to do is not give student a voice or allow for student voice. What we need to do is create and carve out space for student voice. And then what we mean by student voice is not only listening to students, but learning from students and then leading with students.
Yeah, I
so
like that.
That's where our focus is right now. And we're getting to the point this year where we're defining it is we're not tapping in, we're not amplifying student voice unless we're doing those three things. It's just not good enough to listen to students. We have to partner with them in a democratic way to lead and create the schools that we want to create.
And what's the student's role there?
The student's role? The student's role is to partner with adults, but I want to start with what's the staff's role there.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask them that, but go ahead.
Actually, that would be a better place to start.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, let's talk about that. And we've just got a couple minutes left for this panel, but talk about, and I'll ask either of you, jump in, what do you see as the staff's role in that conversation and creating that environment?
I think the staff's role is more making sure that the student's voice is not only being heard, but they're also comprehending what the student is saying. It's different from listening to the student and actually understanding what the student is actually saying. You can always listen to the student and hear it from the one ear and let it go from the out ear, but it's different if it goes through your ear and it actually goes through your brain and you actually understand the student and what the student is trying to say. So I think the staff's role is not only to understand the student, but also to make sure that they're understanding and also participating with the student, so they're also engaging. There's a communication going on back and forth.
And Lucero, can you take that a step further? When she talks about understanding the student, can staff then go a step further in making a difference?
I completely agree with what she says, and adding on would just be the support that, apart from comprehending what students need, would be locating those resources. Teachers being able to understand that even though I cannot completely understand the student, they need help, and I can try finding that help somewhere else, whether it means finding another staff member, another teacher, maybe another student who shares the same ideas, so that collaboration can continue and the student can keep building their ideas and their voice.
And John, last question.
Sure.
What's the student's role?
What's the student's role?
What's the student's role?
The student's role is in the right environment, and I wanted that question answered first because the teachers, the staff, the administrators are in the power position, so it's their responsibility to create the conditions where students are able, they feel that they can open up honestly, critically, to develop a critical lens and edge for our school improvement efforts, and then the student's role is to go all out, all in, and to make their school a better place along with the staff that they're partnering. Yeah.
And I know we've got two good ones here that do just that, right? Thank you all three for kicking off this discussion today. So our next panel is going to discuss ways to raise the student voice so that they're able to impact positive change in their schools. But first, let's take a quick look at the Student Voice Circles initiative that occurred at Appleton and Oakland Mills high schools this year.
So this is our student voice circle process. It's based on the concept of student voice, which we're defining as listening to students, learning from students, and then leading with students. So this circle is focused on getting students and staff together to critically examine, discuss, and plan for school improvement specifically for inclusion and equity.
I thought it was kind of cool because I'd never really participated in something like this before, and I mean, I like sharing my views on just different aspects of everything, and especially something like this, where it can possibly help benefit the school.
I really like what we're doing because we're seeing students in a really different light and a different perspective that you don't see just in the school or in the classroom. People are actually talking about issues and things that people just usually don't talk about, and it's really refreshing.
We're looking toward the students actually for deciding what are the important issues here in this particular school that, if addressed, would make a huge difference for all students, specifically in terms of inclusion and equity. And so what they've decided to look at is teacher-student relationships.
An administrator could say, like, okay, I think this would really work. Well, I mean, if you're not really getting the student's perspective, you're not really seeing where a student's coming from, you might not be able to make the most effective decisions, I think.
Everyone has a different viewpoint, so to be able to get as many as we can from all different backgrounds and kind of even just age is tremendous, because you don't get that very much where they all come together to work like that.
And it's surprising that a lot of people are really open, so it's a lot of personal experiences being shared, and I like that too. And the personal experiences from the classroom to just social life, and it's good.
We spent the past year researching student voice, and what we've learned is that most student voice activity in this country ends with listening to students. What we're trying to do is create a model where not only we listen to students, but we learn from students and then we lead with students. So what's going to come out of this process is staff and students working together to create a more inclusive and more equitable environment.
I mean, the culture that we have now, just as Appleton as a community, I feel like is really great, like already, but I'd like it to be kind of where people can understand where people are coming from with their ideas and their views.
It's really good, it's really positive, and like I said, I like it because you don't see this every day. You definitely don't. People are talking about issues and stuff is happening, and there's good, and it's like I said, refreshing, so happy about that.
Joining me now is Brian Wallace, Assistant Principal at Oakland Mills High School, Nia Burton, an Appleton High School student, and Patrick Seibel, Assistant Principal at Appleton High School. Thanks for joining me on the panel.
Thanks for having us.
So Nia, let's start. So all three of you participated in student voice circles at Oakland Mills and Appleton High School. So Nia, describe the experience a little bit. What is it? John talked about student voice circles briefly on the first panel, but get in a little more detail. What happened in the student voice circles at Appleton?
Okay, so the Student Voice Circle at Appleton is an amazing opportunity where we are trying to better the Appleton community, and we do that by having the students give their opinions, their perspectives, paired along with the staff and administration's opinions and perspective, just trying to figure out these issues, what are the issues, identifying them, and really attacking them to trying to solve them and try to make it better for everyone.
Patrick, what is the issue that Appleton was tackling, or were there multiple?
Well, we didn't really have a clear focus in the beginning. What we tried to do is allow the students and staff and some of the data to help drive our conversations. So we started kind of with the general lens of student engagement, and we're able to move forward and realize that student-staff interactions was kind of a highlight of our school and an area where we felt there was a strong need for some kind of concentrated focus. So that was where we took off from there, and then used data, conversation, and some of our processes to really hash out some solutions. And the students did a great job of coming up with some great action steps that we can move forward with.
So what are some of the, talk a little more specifically about maybe at Appleton, what were some of the issues that were being discussed? Nia, what are some of the conversations that you were having?
We had a lot. Like it was a lot being brought up, but we talked about how we brought up issues that specific students and groups we didn't realize that were going on in the Appleton community, and it was really surprising. And it got very personal first at some points in times within the circle, but it brought up different things that we were seeing that specifically in the classroom or with administration that we didn't realize were happening. So whether it's conflicts with the teacher, why are these conflicts happening, or discrimination, all types of things. And just talking about those personal experiences that kind of pan out on a larger level that we didn't realize were happening.
Those aren't always easy conversations to have.
No, they're not. They're not. But I think the Student Voice Circle definitely made it very easy to have those conversations because we built that sense of trust and that sense of comfort within the circle, even with the staff being there. Like some people might not feel comfortable having these conversations with adults, but we definitely made that connection and were able to speak out on the personal level.
Same experience at Oakland Mills?
Yeah, definitely. I think some of the issues that came up, students were talking about race relations, sexuality, even things as simple as the dress code.
Yeah.
So those were some issues that came out, especially when we were looking at the cultural proficiency continuum. And so one of the things that I thought was really great was all of the different shared experiences that the students had that they were willing to have courage to kind of speak about and to bring up. And so being in an atmosphere where staff and students sit down, have a dialogue about these things, and create a space of trust and shared responsibility was really key with what we were doing at Oakland Mills too.
Again, that's not always easy.
Yeah.
Right. So talk about the makeup of the group a little, Brian. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that it was a 2-to-1 student to staff ratio in the makeup of the group.
Yeah.
So twice as many students. But talk about who the students were. Obviously a very diverse group.
Yeah, very diverse group. Pretty balanced with regards to gender issues, with regards to male and female. A number of staff, and the staff actually represented a good amount of diversity for the departments that are also there. The one thing that I really think was interesting was, and John kind of alluded to this, where the staff members have titles or perceived power. And so trying to flatten that initially, especially within the first round of talks that we were doing. As an administrator, as the only administrator in the group, one of the things that I really emphasized was that the students could call me Brian, which is not necessarily a common thing as we go throughout our day, but to help flatten those titles, to help flatten those positions that we have, to say, you know what, this is an environment where we want to promote the voice that you have, the equity of voice, but also the real life experiences that you have, because I'm a human just like you are, and that's the thing that we share and have in common.
Interesting. How about at Appleton? So, Patrick, talk a little bit about how, and maybe you don't know, how were the students selected for this group? Do you know?
Yeah, so what we wanted to do is part of this conversation about student voice came from our cultural proficiency groups at school. So what we did was the staff that had been through a cultural proficiency training, we tapped on them, our guidance counselors, and the administrative team to help try to choose students that would best represent a wide variety of students. We thought about students that maybe their voices aren't heard as much, or some of those marginalized communities, and we really wanted to tap into as many as we could. So it was very deliberate in trying to create as diverse a group for our first time as possible.
And that's interesting. So, and I had a chance to witness both student voice circles at both schools, and clearly, as John talked about, there is a visual diversity when you see the group. But there's a diversity, what I found, there's a diversity of interests as well, right? Not just cultural or race or those sort of backgrounds, but different people from around the school. So, and you talked about, maybe these weren't, was this group made up not of SGA presidents and sports captains perhaps, but it was students, you know, I know Nia, and she was in the video that we just saw, and another student at Appleton, and I know the other student said, I'm not a student leader at this school. So was that part of the process, was to trying to raise some voices that may not necessarily be part of the conversation at this point?
Sure. When we think about it, student engagement as being one of our focus areas, you need not only engaged students, but more importantly, you need disengaged students sometimes, because you can't fix student engagement without addressing those students that feel maybe disenfranchised or disengaged. So in that decision-making process, we wanted to make sure that not only were the students that were elected by their peers as leaders, but also students that might not ordinarily have traditional leadership roles. And that's one nice thing about, I think, these student voice circles, is that it really does provide an opportunity for any student to become a leader. We had decision makers who were elected by clubs and groups and organizations and teams to be leaders in that room, but we also had students that had never had any formal or informal leadership roles on the same level, making the exact same decisions as our staff members, our team leaders in our building, our administrators. And I think that was really, as Brian said, the power of that group, is that we were all on an equal playing field. We were all making the same decisions, and we were all invested in the exact same things.
Nia, prior to Student Voice Circles, how did you perceive your role in the Appleton school community? Were you a leader? Did you perceive yourself as a leader?
I would say so, definitely. I just think that just going through high school, I developed into a leader. Maybe not initially as first. When I first came in, I was very hesitant and quiet, but I see my role as just being somebody that speaks up for their education, or just that's involved with different clubs. I personally, I am a leader in Delta Scholars or BSU. I might lead in those positions, but through the experience through Appleton and the community and dealing with different classes and teachers, I've just advocating for myself. That has definitely been a very important leadership role.
And what are you learning about yourself? And what are you learning about your peers through this process?
A lot, actually, and it's very eye-opening, and it's really cool to see what I'm learning, because it's things you don't see every day. It's things that aren't being talked about every day. I'm just kind of learning that people have these issues, and they might not be as visible in the community, but they're still there. And they might not be talked about, but they're still there. I'm learning that people want to resolve these issues, even though they might not talk about it, and it might just be an underlying kind of thing on the side. Actually speaking up about it within the circle has taught me that people want to fix it, and people are passionate about fixing it, and they want to take this step. So I've learned that, yeah.
This is amazing. Brian, how do we take this model that's created for a group of 20, 30 people, and we expand it? How does this reach the entire Oakland Mills community?
That's a really good question. I think it starts with, depending on the community that you're in, as far as the building you're in, I think it starts with the smaller groups first, and how each person who's a part of the student voice is a student leader, and how we kind of let that ripple effect travel. It doesn't have to be on a grand scale in front of the entire building, but we may find success in smaller groups. I know that the success for our group is the intimacy and the trust that we've built. So if we start with smaller groups that we all kind of have a reach into, and then have a focused agenda with regards to how we're strategically implementing some of the things that we want to talk about, I think that's a really good way to start. But we also have to keep in mind that the students have more of the answers than we do. So while you and I talk about that as adults, the students may have an even better way as to how to expand that throughout the building.
At Appleton, you've completed the student voice circle process, right? So where are you going now, Patrick? Where's this headed? Where's the conversation? I assume the conversation didn't end when John Crown-Apple left that final day. Where's the conversation going?
In fact, it feels like it just kind of started as we really talk about
great.
Our next steps. This was the initial stage of the process to build that trust, to open up and to come up with those ideas. But now really where we are is that on our last session, students were able to come up with 4 or 5 key action steps that they wanted to take, and students were able to kind of identify areas that they wanted to focus on. So we're allowing the students to then kind of take hold of each one of those different projects. And it really deals with your last question, which is, how do we bring this out to the school at large? And the students really wanted to do it themselves. A lot of it was, we would like to share through our staff. We would like to share what we've been working on and some of our findings with the staff. we want to come up with the best way to do it with our students. So these kind of smaller groups that are going to break off and work on these individual projects, one is going to be tasked with helping to present the information and working directly with staff to improve some of the areas that they identified. Others will be working on trying to help inform the students. So they talked about things like coming with a public service announcement or a video to help share their experiences and to help encourage more students to use their voice in the community.
Nia, it was worthwhile?
Oh yeah, definitely. Just like learning new things and talking to different people, and the whole experience was definitely
Fantastic. Great. Thank you all. Thanks for joining and having this discussion with me. So our final panel is going to explore ways that we can all work together to ensure that the voice of the student body is equally represented by all backgrounds and by all interests. But let's take a moment to see what student voice looked like recently at Hammond High School.
Change, in fact, may not come now or anytime soon, but we may educate and bring understanding to such an atrocious, hateful thing called racism.
No one of color should live their life in fear. So let me be frank and let me be clear. This is an important moment right here. We're the future, so continuing to fight against this is how we'll pioneer.
Even if you don't feel it and even if you don't see it, it does not mean it's not happening. We are one of the best school systems in America, but yet there's still so much ignorance.
By not talking about it and ignoring important issues like this, we allow and encourage.
A lot of us are in our own bubble, and we don't even open our eyes and see around us that this is going on around us, and we're choosing to ignore it. And I opened my eyes and I was like, all right, this is something that is real. This is something that I can change. And this is something that even if I had a small conversation with someone who just right next to me just dropped the N-word, if I just talked to them about what you really just said to me and how it made me feel, I can change that. I feel like we have the power to change that.
When we don't have a conversation, we remain divided. To cover up any racial matter is to deny the severity and prevalence of this issue in our own community.
How we're going to get our voices out there? We need to stop the silence, and let's start a conversation.
What is different between you, me, or anyone else here? Everyone I know is doing so well here because of where we've grown up. We've been given great opportunities, but we should be able to provide for everyone else.
To be honest, it's not just a Mount Hebron issue. It's not just a Howard County issue, but this is a national issue that has to be addressed. And educating and preaching these type of behaviors is key, because I think teaching that youth helps us. We know things might not change for this generation, but we can help change it for the next generation.
This rally is a step, but the importance of actually working towards improving our society is that we don't just stop today. After all the cameras are gone, after everyone's set down their signs, it starts in our hallways and our conversations, because a lot of the people that are here, including me, we find ourselves in these conversations or even downgrading our own race. That's how it starts, and that's how it continues. So stop it in your conversation. Stop it in the hallway. Stop it when you see a girl getting bullied because she's dark-skinned and she laughs it off. Stop it right there.
I'm criticized, but all your bullets ricochet. You shoot me down, but I get up. I'm bulletproof, nothing to lose. Fire away, fire away.
Thanks to Hammond High School for providing that video. Joining me now on this final panel is my Hammond High School team. Marcy Leonard's the principal at Hammond High School. Alexis Stratton-Bratcher is a Hammond High School student. And Steve Martin is the Hammond PTSA president. Thanks for joining me. It's been pretty good discussions we've had so far, right? We'll wrap it up here. So talk to me a little bit about the video that we just saw. What was the event and what was it in response to?
So a student group came to the administration at Hammond and wanted an opportunity to create a space for dialogue around issues specifically related to race and ethnicity. They were inspired by the actions of the students at Mount Hebron and wanted to create a space for Hammond students to have an opportunity to share their voices, which you heard so powerfully just a couple of minutes ago.
Absolutely. And I think we've got one of the leaders of that group sitting here with us, and Alexis. Alexis, talk about What inspired you to approach your principal and say, look, this is what we want to do?
Well, we actually, we went to the Mount Hebron rally, and that just seeing the energy of the students and seeing their anger and seeing their passion for what they were fighting for just was like, it made all of us, about 4 of us, say, you know, we need to do this at our school because we have a lot of students who are passionate as well about kind of some of the things that they were talking about. And so I was like, we definitely need to do this here at our school.
And this was really kind of a joint effort. The students worked with school administration and staff to pull this off, right? This wasn't a disruption of the school day. This was in fact an opportunity to educate students and to provide an opportunity to, as we heard, raise their voice. Right.
That's accurate. Probably even more accurate to say that the students led us, and we just followed along with where their passions were taking them. And it was really important that they take the lead on the process so that they would have an opportunity to be able to share their really powerful voices about how they're feeling growing up in this community and being a part of the Howard County school system and being a part of Hammond High.
Yeah. And Steve, as a parent, talk about how the parent perceives sort of what happened at Hammond and how terrific it ended up being.
Well, I think my observation from seeing the event, but also in talking with other parents, is the excitement and the energy that the parents felt that their kids basically created a social justice experiment outside of the classroom. And so there were lots of different aspects of it. I think the students also took seriously the opportunity, appreciation that Ms. Leonard allowed them to have the initiative. It says something about the environment that they were willing to even come to her to say that.
Yeah.
But I think also so in return, I think the students took on the responsibility of making sure that it was productive and that it was an event that was just the beginning of a dialogue.
So let's move on from that event a little bit and talk about diversity in our schools and diversity in student voice as it pertains, when we think of diversity, our first thought goes to what it looks like, as John said earlier in our first panel, right? And it is, but there's more in a school community. It's not always what it looks like. And one of the things that they learned in the student voice circles is looks aren't always what they appear to be, right? So Marcy, talk about in your school, what is diversity in your student body? Is it always visual?
It's not always visual. The visual aspect guides and informs a lot of the work that we do, but it's an iceberg, and there's a little tip that's right above the surface, and there's a whole lot that's underneath the surface. And one of the most important things that we can do is make sure that as the staff members in the building, that we're really listening to the students as they're bringing their diverse perspectives to what goes on in our school. Our school motto is that we're the school where people are important.
Oh, that's good.
And regardless of whether you are a person of color, whether you are a person that is has different gender identity or sexual orientation or religion or socioeconomic status, we want to make sure that there's a safe space for every one of our students. And part of that, creating the safe space, is creating a space where we can talk about difficult issues in a way that allows us to move forward and to not just glean at the surface, but to really get underneath the surface.
And students have always wanted to have a say in what happens in the school building, right?
Yes.
Right, sure, and they should. Talk about what if we were to think of maybe like a student council, and it may not be the SGA, maybe it is, but what does a diverse group of student leaders look like in a school? What could that look like?
Well, look like.
Let me correct that. What does that feel like?
Yes, that's actually what I was going to say. To me, diversity, a diverse group would not be what it looks like. It's what it feels like. It's what the conversations are about. You know, it would be gender-wise. You know, sexual orientation. Even just like different student groups, you know, students who aren't necessarily in GT classes, and you also have, you know, your student athletes. All of those coming together, to me, that's what it looks like when you have different students from different just backgrounds in general coming together to talk about things that they don't usually talk about.
And Steve, what's a parent's role here? How do parents from at home help sort of feed this?
Yeah, I think the challenge is, so as a follow-up to the video, we had a parents meeting, and I felt the need to try to control the conversation, and Marcy and the staff involved, Malcolm Anderson, said, let's follow up exactly with what the kids are talking about, because that's what the parents need to hear back at home. And so it was important to have that mantra, I think, exist throughout the meetings, so that the parents understand that there is a dialogue that you can have with your parents, that you can have with your kids on these issues, and that they do care. I mean, I think the feeling was the issue, I think, because we've all heard this conversations that we're going to take care of your kids, and we have a diverse community, diverse teachers, and your kids come home and tell you a different story. And oftentimes we're feeling like we have to approach the school system when there's a problem. But approaching it this way, in a proactive way, allows us to sort of be in the room and set the tone, and then because we're developing relationships, we're more readily able to have those conversations that are difficult conversations. I mean, the kids took a great risk, the administration took a huge risk. I mean, things could have blown up. And I think that's an important factor that I'd like for the parents to understand, is that we can have these conversations, and they're personal. But if we have a relationship, we can walk away, think about it, come back, and continue the dialogue, because it is the actions afterward that help us continue on, I think.
And Alexis, talk about the afterwards, after the event. Was this event in any way a game changer at Hammond High School in terms of being able to have these conversations?
I think definitely. I think it opened the door to the students who hadn't really talked about it before and now they're speaking, and they're asking us, what's next? And we've done a few things, like in our lunch we had a not necessarily separate, but you could be involved if you would like. It wasn't necessarily mandatory, and we had round tables, and we talked about just different. We had a few questions that we would discuss and just talk about all of the students as a whole, and how their backgrounds kind of just how we could move forward from that.
What have you seen from your perspective after this event?
We had an opportunity to, because we didn't want it to just be a one-time a dialogue. So we had the opportunity, as both Steve and Alexa said, is to do follow-up questions in small groups with PTSA, then with our students at lunch, and then with our staff members at an after-school meeting as well. So what it's done is it's allowed us to begin to have conversations that we need to be having, and created a space for us to continue to have those conversations. You've said a couple of times that they're not easy conversations, and that's certainly true. But as you were speaking, I was thinking about that quote from A League of Their Own, where the coach says, it's supposed to be hard. If it was easy, everybody would do it. It's the hard that makes it special. And it's really the hard that makes all of the student voice equity circles, as well as the work we're doing at Hammond, really special and powerful for the community.
The students that we saw in that video, and that video we just saw was just a short part of really what occurred, and the actual video is about 9 minutes long. But a number of students felt moved to speak. How do we ensure that moving forward, not every student spoke? So how do we make sure that we are creating an environment that maybe the students that are quiet and they get the good grades and they keep to themselves, though, that they feel that it's safe to speak when they want to? How do we continue that? To build that environment?
How do we continue? I would just say continuing to have just like more dialogues, and maybe in different ways in the classrooms, getting to students, be it like social media, all of that, making them feel as though their voice is important, and then when a student feels like their voice is important, then they want to get involved. And so I think that's kind of the way to ensure that students are getting involved.
And I think another thing is to let them know that by being silent, it's not that they're not causing controversy, they're allowing some things to go on, that if they speak up, it's important for everybody to be fully invested and take the risk. And so even those kids that don't have issues, even if they're asking questions to understand what the issues are, that says something to me that, you know, you want to know what my perspective is. It doesn't mean that you're going to solve it, but you're respecting me enough to ask me what some of the issues are. So I think sometimes it's not speaking up to state your position, it's just speaking up in support of further dialogue.
Good. And Steve, you've got a junior at Hammond High School. And you've had one already go through Hammond High School?
That's right.
Talk about the conversations that as a parent we could have at home with our students to ensure that we're building on the things that are happening in our schools, and we're building on what administrators are saying and students are feeling. How can we encourage that? How can we build upon that?
Yeah, what's interesting is that, and I do think it's about focusing on what you can build upon, because there can be, particularly if you're experiencing some tough conversations with teachers you feel are picking on you, that can be where you're feeling attacked and you want to respond angrily. But if we can get the kids to focus on those relationships that they have with kids from other cultures, other economic, positions, you realize that there's a lot of commonalities that we could focus on. And for the most part, we're somewhere in the middle here. There are these voices out here talking, yelling in the other directions. And most of us, I think, a lot of us find we don't really feel like that. And so we have to speak up too, and talk to each other so that those outside voices become more of an anomaly and they stand out rather than what's the general. I mean, the kid, from the parent's perspective, you're trying to get your kid through the craziness of being a teenager in high school. Right. But there are those issues of experiencing discrimination or things that are tough for them to walk through. And I think it's about helping to educate them on history, making sure they have both perspectives, and that it's not always just about you. And then what is it about you that you can look at and also contribute to the conversation rather than just being upset and walking away. You have to bring some contribution to it. So I do think it's about parents empowering their kids to say, you have a voice, man. I mean, to see the kids create the video, to have the conscience to go and talk to, I mean, those are all leadership skills, things they're going to need in life, regardless of what situation they're in. So I do think it's a life. So I think it's important for the parents to not be afraid of it. They're just getting some social life skills outside of the classroom that are really important for them to negotiate anyway, whether you're in Howard County or any other community. But I do think in Howard County, as a parent, you feel like, wow, this is a place that we can do it because there's so much diversity here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Marcy, talk about briefly some of the other opportunities that are occurring on a daily basis or an annual basis in our schools for students to really have a voice or even just participate in the process.
There's a lot of both formal and informal pathways for that to happen. Formal pathways, whether it's student government or other leadership clubs and teams that all of the schools have. There are leadership experiences at the middle and high school level that are put on by the school system, such as the Middle School Leadership Conference, the YES Summit, Youth Empowerment Summit, as well as Voices for Change. But the real power comes in those informal conversations that happen every day in the hallways and in the classrooms between students, between staff members and students, with parents as well. It's in those daily interactions that we build those connections that then allow for those richer conversations to happen, because hopefully we've created that safe space where we can go a little bit deeper.
Alexis, do you feel that safe space is being created at Hammond High School?
I definitely think so.
So where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here?
Didn't end after that.
No, they didn't. I think, where do we go from here? We just keep talking about it. Keep talking about it, keep bringing it up in the classrooms, making sure that specifically when negative comments are being heard around the school, that teachers are on it, because I think it's important that the teachers are telling them it's not okay for you to be doing these things. And like I said, just talking about it, and having really uncomfortable conversations.
Uncomfortable conversations. Yeah. That's good. That's good. Agree?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Terrific. Thank you. Wow. Well, that's all the time that we have for today. I feel like we could probably go on for another hour with these panels. First, I'd like to thank all of you who joined us for this broadcast and engaged in the conversation on Twitter. I encourage you, students, to continue that discussion, not only on Twitter, but actually take it to your schools and expand upon these conversations with your peers and the adults in your school community. It's not solely a high school issue. Middle and elementary school students should be finding ways to lend your voice to the conversations in your schools. I encourage each of you to be positive agents of change. I'd also like to thank all of our guests for joining me today, as well as the students that have been leading the conversation on Twitter. Also, thank you to the outstanding team of people we have working here behind the scenes of HCPSS Insight. So on behalf of each of our guests and everybody that participated on HCPSS Insight, I'm Brian Bassett. Thanks for joining us.